Hi everyone, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to draw a dragonfly in pastels. Now the first step here was to work on the background, and the main reason for that is I wanted to make sure that I've captured the transparent effect of the wings. Now because the wings are transparent, whatever background colour is in that reference photo, it needs to make it look like the wings are in front of that and therefore having that translucency that you can see those colours from the background through it. So what I wanted to make sure of is that I had my background in initially, and there are a couple of ways that we could achieve that. Now I ended up changing my mind midway through this drawing process, and I'm really glad that I did. What I've decided to do here, and it definitely worked in the best way to achieve the quicker results but a very effective result as well, is to include all of that background behind where the wings are going to be. So at the moment here, I'm actually taking the time to draw around the wings and then using a pastel pencil to outline the edges of the wings so that I don't lose their placement. However, this was definitely far more time consuming and I was making it more difficult than it needed to be. So what I've gone for is more of a bold approach, and I've completely ignored the wings, and then I can put those in later on. Now my main concern here is to make sure that I don't fill the tooth of the paper, because I do want to be making sure I've got tooth left that I can use for adding the details on that lovely wing detailing, and still make sure that I can capture the lighting that reflects off the wing edges. So here, this is definitely one of those times where I'm finding that using this new technique can definitely make that process far easier, more effective. It's certainly going to be more realistic when the drawing is finished, but I do need to be aware of how much of that pastel I'm applying to the paper. Now because this is so important, it is something that I cover thoroughly in the real-time step-by-step tutorial. I want to be making sure that I'm covering every process as thoroughly as I can, and that's why I've drawn this with a real-time voiceover while I'm drawing. So every single process is explained thoroughly in the moment. There are no sections sped up or cut out. It makes it very step-by-step. Now onto the wing detailing. Once I've got the original outline back in place, I can then really focus on those main lights and darks. Now the one thing here that is really important is the darker values are very subtle. So it might only be a darker purple or something where there is a very slight shadow, but for the most part here we're working with lighter values and some of those midtones. Now the layering process here is subtle. It needs to be in order to make that transparent effect realistic. I want to be making sure that I'm not covering too much of the background as well. Now in all of my tutorials I talk about the importance of working on the right layer at the right time. Now when drawing wings like this, it is easier to draw the wings that are behind first to really help with that three-dimensional effect, and then you can put the wings that are in front on top. So it just helps with making that drawing process a little bit easier. Now when you start working on the detailing, the patterns within the wing, this would be the same for any insect. If you're drawing a bumblebee, for example, the process would be exactly the same. But we want to be making sure that we are going for close. Now what I am starting with here is a subtle pencil. Now although I'm going to have to lighten these patterns a lot as I continue to layer, I'm not starting off with my brightest pencil first. Now the reason being, that can actually make that process more daunting because we are working with much more of a bolder pencil. If we're working with a subtle pencil, then it means that we're more likely to be able to fix any mistakes that might happen early on. Now in terms of capturing the lighting and that transparent effect, obviously there is almost like a layer of film on the wings, so you want to be making sure that if there is any sky colour that's being reflected or bounced light from the wings, that we've captured that. Now in this reference photo that I was using, that was showing in the colour of blues or purples. There wasn't any of those darker shadows which I've mentioned a moment ago. Now in this situation, for this type of wing effect, it's the background colour that is providing those darker values. So I don't want to be going in here with a base layer of my pastel pencils. I'm jumping straight into my details. This is okay for this type of subject. When I work on the body of the dragonfly, the approach is going to be very different. I'm going to be working with my pastel pencils to get a good base foundation in first before I use the details. So it is something here where we are adjusting that technique purely based on the effect here of the wing and that transparency. But I'm not having to darken any of those values because I've made sure that my background was accurate first. And that's a big consideration when working on any wing that is transparent. If you do feel like your values need to be darker, that tells you that your background isn't darker. It's not necessarily the wings that need to be darker, because obviously it's the background colour that's providing that base foundation for the wing itself. So if ever you do feel like your wings need to be a little bit darker, I would always recommend to darken that area of the background rather than putting in a base layer for the wing with your pastel pencils. Because then you're going to end up with the wings that lose that transparent effect. They're going to have more of a solid base foundation, which therefore wouldn't capture the transparency like what we're trying to capture here. Now onto the body of the dragonfly, and as I've mentioned, this is where the layering process is very different. I'm starting with my base foundation first. So this is the same process as if I was drawing fur or feathers. I want to be making sure that I'm hinting at my main lights and darks and that I'm following the structure of those highlights and shadows. Now what I mean by that is, for example, on the eye here, I'm curving my pencil strokes over to follow that shape of the eye. If you're working with fur or feather, you would also want to make sure that you're capturing that as well. So if you notice that the fur or the feathers change direction over a main joint of that animal, the shoulder blade, the neck, whatever it may be, then adjusting how you're moving that pencil at the base layer stage is something that I feel makes a big difference. Now as I continue to block in more of the colours here, the colour saturation is something that I really wanted to capture. Now the bright colours is what makes this dragonfly so eye-catching, so I'm wanting to make sure that I have got those layers nice and clean and that I'm avoiding any muddy layers. Now muddy layers can happen very easily with pastels, and the most common cause is that the first initial layers are too dark, and then when we try to put our vibrant colours on top, that colour saturation is lost. So you can see here throughout this layering process that all of the colours for the base stage are lighter and that I'm darkening them up in stages. Now one thing here that I really found useful was I was breaking it up into one small section at a time rather than working on all of the body at one stage. I found that that was far easier to make this look more natural at a bit more of a quicker rate. Now this is my personal preference. I do like to break everything up into small sections and individual layers so that I don't get overwhelmed with that drawing process. If you are finding that you're spending more time staring at your reference photo, not quite sure where you should be working, then that is an indication that you're focusing on too much of a larger area. Try scaling that down slightly and you should work a bit more effectively and not get as stressed throughout that layering process. Now something I speak a lot about in all of my videos is the importance of contrast. Now this project here really focuses on that, and it is a great lesson to work on if we're looking to refine our pencil technique. The importance of contrast is what makes that animal on that drawing look realistic. It's not worrying about the exact colour. Now this is a colourful drawing, but I could have used any range of yellows, greens and blues and this would still look realistic because I've focused on my contrast and the values. It's the lightness or darkness of that colour that's more important. Now as I continue to work on the body, this is where it's really going to take more of that three-dimensional shape. You can see that I'm working with my lighter pencils, I'm adding in a few of my darker details as well, but as I'm doing that, it's helping to form that more cylinder shape of the body. I'm capturing that rounded shape because of where I'm putting my lights and my darks. Now the placement of the highlights and shadows, this is also very important. I want to be making sure that I've not only got the range of my values right, but that they are in the right place. As I continue to layer here, you can see that I've got a darker orange colour on the top and then it gets a little bit lighter in the centre before I start to add a very subtle darker layer underneath as well, finishing off with a tiny layer of highlights on those hairs on the lower edge of the body. This is helping to really capture that rounded three-dimensional shape. So where we're placing those highlights and shadows will adjust the shape and form of that animal. This is something that is really highlighted, especially when drawing fur or feathers. But even smaller, smoother areas like this, the placement of the lights and the darks is crucial. Now the very last element for this was I wanted to incorporate something that was a little bit more colourful and added a bit more texture. In the original reference photo, the dragonfly was just resting on a normal twig. It was just a standard light brown, some greys, and it wasn't very interesting at all. I wanted to make this something that I could incorporate more of that personal touch, more of that artistic license within this piece. So I didn't want to go with something that was too floral and that would distract from the dragonfly, but what I have got here is a little bit of additional colour with that purple to complement the colours within the dragonfly, but something that had a bit more of a simple structure to it. And again, I'm breaking this up into small sections and individual layers to make this drawing process as easy as I can. Now the one thing that's really important here is where you are adding in additional elements that's not in the original reference photo is that the lighting is the same. I want to be making sure that the highlights on the flower are hitting the same angle as they are on the dragonfly, so that it looks natural and that I haven't used two different images in my drawing. So I really do hope that this video has been useful. If it was, I'd be very grateful if you could give it a like and a thumbs up. It makes a huge difference to my channel. I also upload a couple of videos to YouTube every week, so if you would like to get notified of that content, then don't forget to hit the subscribe and the bell button. If you would like to draw along to the real-time tutorial of this dragonfly, then I'll link all of the details to that in the description below. If you've got any art-related questions, feel free to pop them in the comments because I'm more than happy to help if I can. And I'm going to be uploading another video next week, but as always, thank you so much for watching.